When Britain handed Hong Kong back to China, universal suffrage when electing executive and legislative officials was a stated goal. It didn't happen. For the past 20 years, with one exception, Hong Kong's pro-democracy activists have held peaceful July 1 demonstrations in the island's Victoria Park and nearby streets. These annual demonstrations remind Beijing that activists want more political rights and are held on the anniversary of when the former British colony officially became an autonomous piece of China back in 1997. That one exception of no protests came at a predictable time last year when China's president and Communist Party leader Xi Jinping was in town to mark the 20th anniversary of the mainland's recovery of sovereignty over Hong Kong. Local government officials didn't want their boss embarrassed by noisy demonstrators chanting opposition to some of the rules he has imposed upon them, and so instead they gave permits only to party loyalists, who held their own demonstration. This year will bring exception number 2. Although pro-democracy organizers sought the needed, and generally routine, permits last December, they recently learned the park's 6 soccer pitches are again off-limits. Instead, some 40 pro-Beijing groups were given the right to hold a charity event July 1 to mark the 21st anniversary of Britain's handover of Hong Kong, even though political groups by law aren't supposed to run charities. The official, if dubious, reason is that neighborhood residents demanded that celebratory activities be organized to mark the end of colonial rule, rather than have the park host another noisy gathering of the politically discontent. Though 2018 will see another pro-democracy demonstration, it will have a less desirable venue and almost certainly will draw fewer marchers than in previous years. The July 1 protest will also follow an annual commemoration in Hong Kong of the June 4, 1989 massacre near Beijing's Tiananmen Square, when 1,000 or more youthful demonstrators were gunned down by the Chinese army. But this year's gathering will continue a downward trend of its crowd size. Hong Kongers below middle age have no memory of the Beijing event, and local student groups, dismayed by the failure of their own Occupy Central protest 3 years ago to bring political gains, have decided to stay away this time. By themselves, these aren't dramatic setbacks for those Hong Kong citizens who actively seek greater political freedoms or their right to exercise the high degree of political autonomy that Beijing promised decades ago and never delivered, something most residents want, according to polls. But the decline in attendance and the restriction of these event venues is another sign of the tightening rules imposed by Beijing party officials and their supine Hong Kong government colleagues. Over the past decade, and especially since President Xi took control of both government and ruling party, Beijing authorities have grown increasingly intolerant of all dissent, with Hong Kong's demand for greater local democracy high on their list of forbidden pleasures. In many ways, these leaders may have tossed Marx overboard, but they cling to Lenin more tightly than ever since the days of Mao Zedong's erratic rule. This makes Hong Kong's quest for full local autonomy, with defense and foreign policy reserved to the central government, more elusive than ever, perhaps even hopeless. Using assorted legal and administrative procedures, the Hong Kong government has thinned the ranks of pro-democrats in the local legislature and tilted the system further in favor of its loyalists. The free speech is legally guaranteed. They have decreed that advocating Hong Kong independence or self-determination is illegal. Although these goals may be unattainable at best, Beijing has now made merely seeking them is prohibited. Furthermore, opposing socialism on the mainland is also forbidden. Beijing authorities are chipping away at the local court independence, based on British common law, while likewise imposing limits on academic freedom. Disrespecting the Chinese national anthem, March of the Volunteers, will become a criminal offense. Another symbolic restriction is that government radio no longer rebroadcasts the BBC Foreign Service but instead hosts Beijing's official news in Mandarin, which most Hong Kong people don't speak well. It wasn't supposed to be this way. When British and Chinese negotiators agreed on how Beijing would regain sovereignty over Hong Kong 20 years ago, they settled on a unique method called one country, two systems. The brainchild of former leader Deng Xiaoping, it made Hong Kong a permanent part of the Chinese nation while allowing Hong Kong people to manage their own affairs, legal, political, and economic, by methods not allowed on the mainland. For example, universal suffrage when electing executive and legislative officials was a stated goal. Beijing officials said then this hands-off method might, among other things, set an example for future Chinese governance and entice Taiwan to accept mainland oversight under a similar system. Pages.